All right, good morning, everybody. This is the Red Hot Topic Award or Outgoing Subawards on-demand learning session. We're going to be going over Outgoing Subawards in RAMP and discussing the Outgoing Subaward process in the Subaward Portal. You all should have received the RAMP Research Administration Portal, RAMP revised desk reference instruction sheet, just a 2-page instruction sheet going over the various processes for outgoing subawards, shared grants, and regrants. The major difference that you'll see on this document is recently we've changed the process for awards with carryover restrictions. Previously, we could have one project for the outgoing sub. The major change that we will be going over is that they will have to be separate projects. So you can follow along on this sheet or just like use it as a reference, but we will be going over the RAMP record here. So this is a RAMP record that's been created for training purposes, and I'll pretty much be going over all of the pages, but I'm going to be focusing on the financial setup, budget allocation, and the reconciliation page. So as for demonstration purposes, I picked a standard NIH award. I don't have an award document that we can follow, but it's pretty self-explanatory once we get into the main pages here. So this is a prime NIH award. So we will be going into the award here. And for an outgoing sub, I've created this demonstration that we will be subbing to another university and just one sub, but we're going to imagine that this award does not have automatic carryover. So as we walk through the general award information, this is all pretty standard for whether you have outgoing subs or not. And the financial setup page, you can see that we have outlined a large number of projects. This is going to be one UW PI, so we don't have multiple PIs here, and one outgoing sub to the University of Minnesota. So since this award does not have automatic carryover, the normal process that has been standard would to have been separate projects for all UW spending accounts. So you can see here years 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And each budget period year is allocated for that relevant budget period. The outgoing sub, what's the new process now is that we also need annual projects per year for outgoing subs. So I'm going to go over one UW project just so we're kind of on the same page as what we typically see. So for an NIH award, you can include the project name, the dates. It would likely be GM10, sometimes GM98, or fellowships, but in this case, it's just the standard research. 144, RSP, RCAT rule set, that's the standard rule set. And no, this is a UW project. So we would answer no for this. And so the rest of these 5 are all the same aside from the dates. So the financial account, this is what we mean by projects. So this would be the first project for the outgoing sub to the University of Minnesota for year 1. So the dates are relevant for that budget period. We have an MTDC indirect cost base type. The major difference here is for all outgoing subawards, regrants, and shared grants, we're using GM code 15. So it's still a research project. It's still, we have GM10 on our side, but just to classify all these specific types of outgoing sub projects, we're using GM15. And we have a research rate. It's 144, program code 4, CAT rule set, and yes, this is a financial account or project for an outgoing subaward. And so I like to just highlight that this is, remember to go to the Subaward Portal to request your outgoing sub. This project is not the actual request for the outgoing sub team to issue that sub to University of Minnesota. And so I did the same thing for all 5 of these. The major difference is that the dates, are different for each year. So these are our projects, and when we activate, the project IDs will populate here. So if you want to refer back to them after it's activated, you'll see the financial account with a specific SFS project ID allocated there. The next page is budget allocations. So we have 1 allocation per project. So we have the same number of allocations, and each allocation is tied to a specific financial account. So again, I'm going to demonstrate the UW project. So this is something that a lot of people sometimes have issues with, is the allocations. I like to think of them as pots of money. So you have a pot of money that you are allocating to a financial account or project. So you can identify which financial account or project you want to put this pot of money that you're allocating to that project. All the same information, the dates here, since we have received the notice of award for, I think I put 150. So let's just say like, let's say it's like 300,000 or something like that. We are allocating 155,000 to the UW project. So we are going to say authorized by sponsor for this period only. For the UW project, we're allocating $100,000 in direct costs and $55,500 in indirect costs, with an indirect rate of our UW 55.5, and it'll calculate the total. So this is the UW portion, and years 2 through 5 are going to be set to not authorized. And I did include the proposed or expected allocations, and it's just set to not authorized here. This step of doing these not authorized, it is optional. RAMP will allow you not to do it, and we don't require that you have all of the out year allocations. Just a note that sometimes, especially if it's really unknown, NIH is very clear, usually what you're anticipating, but sometimes they can be a little tricky if you're, doing the mod for the subsequent year. So it is optional. It is nice because you'll kind of see the future years, but not required. So the outgoing sub to University of Minnesota year 1. So this is, again, going to the financial account identified here for year 1 of our 10 financial accounts. And you're going to select authorized with the same budget period dates. And here we've allocated to the sub their total costs. So their total proposed budget is $50,000. That should be inclusive of University of Minnesota's direct and indirect rates. That becomes the direct costs. So this is really the important piece for making sure your reconciliation is appropriate. The common mistake that we see here is folks putting the specific subawardees direct and indirect costs here with the subawardees indirect rate. That's not how we do the allocations and reconciliations in RAMP. That is what you're going to be entering in the Subaward portal. So for RAMP, we're using the subawardees total costs. Their direct and indirect will be our direct costs. So we're allocating $50,000 to be issued to University of Minnesota. This financial account, so this is the pot of money going to the year 1 subaward financial account, uses UW's indirect rate, because that is what we used in the proposal. We proposed, that they would get $50,000 in year 1, and we apply 55.5% to the first $25,000 as instructed in our F&A rate agreement. So 55.5% of $25,000 is $13,875. So this is what's allocated in year one, assuming that the direct cost is over $25,000. Obviously, if it's under $25,000, you would include the adjusted dollar value here. And like I said before, the periods 2 through 5 are going to be very similar and not authorized. The only major difference, especially since this is budget period 2 for an outgoing sub, we've reached our cap of the first 25,000 claiming indirects on that. So here, this sub, they're still getting $50,000 per year from this NIH award. The major difference for year 2 through 5 is going to be $0 is going to be populated under indirects because we've already claimed the 13,875 on the budget period 1. And I see that there are questions coming in. I'm just going to get through the reconciliation portion and then we can take a pause for questions and we can go back and go over those. So on the reconciliation page, each allocation set to authorized will populate down here. So we had set 2 of the 10 budget allocations to authorized. So those 2 allocations need to be reconciled. So we're going to first do the UW budget reconciliation. And remember, we had $100,000 in direct costs and the $55,500 in associated indirect costs. So here I just plugged in some demo dollars here to total up to $100,000 and ramp, because I had entered 55.5% in the F&A rate, it will automatically populate the correct indirect rate here. I do want to emphasize that we have moved to categorical budgets, and so we should be reconciling into the categorical budgets. That is just a system change that we have, and it will streamline down the line appropriate spending on the award. So this is the UW portion. Notice here that we did not enter any funds in this line or this line. So the sub less than and greater than $25,000, those lines are reserved for GM 15 projects. So outgoing sub projects should only use these 2 lines, sub greater than or less than 25,000. And here, remember that we allocated $50,000 in direct costs, which is the outgoing subawardee's total cost. So this is inclusive of their direct and total for budget period 1. And we split the costs, the $50,000 into the sub less than 25,000 and the sub greater than 25,000 line. If this was $100,000, we would put 75 here. This is the only line that will calculate the indirect costs if you're using these 2 budget category lines correctly. So here, this 13,875 is calculating off of 25,000. Another common issue that I see is putting 50,000 here. That will not calculate the appropriate indirect rates. So although we've reconciled 50,000, it's not populating correctly the indirect rate here. So it's very important that we split out the 25,000 to be automatically calculating the associated UW indirect rate. So I'm gonna pause here for questions because I see them coming in.
I've been trying to keep up in the chat,
Okay.
Allison.
Is there anything that we should talk about?
No,
Budget
there was one question about whether the budget would automatically populate from the funding proposal into the award record, and that does not happen. Correct?
I'm not certain. I don't see a lot of budget imports. I just see a lot of people just doing the manual adjustments. I'm going to go out on a limb and say if you've correctly built your budget this way that I'm describing, theoretically, I think you can import a budget. So if you've built the budget that way in the funding proposal, I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think RAMP was designed so that it can import this way correctly. I don't have an example that I can show of that, but I see some people saying, yes, you can import. Here is the import button. You can click this and then undo all changes if you need to. Oh, Zach, thank you. It doesn't work with non-carryover.
I was
Danielle's
just going
raised
to
her hand
add
too.
to that it can work if your proposed budget matches up with the award amounts. What I see a lot of times is that it doesn't, especially for an NIH award where it's common to have at least a little bit of a budget cut with the award. And so then when you go to make your adjustments to actually reconcile the budget to match the notice of award, it's a little bit of a different entry process in which you have to like subtract or add to certain categories based on the imported budget if you use it, rather than just entering the actual awarded amount categories. So it can be helpful if maybe the award amounts are close, or if they match exactly, then you don't have to re-enter them. But for a lot of times with our federal sponsors that make cuts or don't issue awards based on the budget period year, there might be a lot of changes you have to make.
And if you do choose to import the budget, this is the column that it would populate into. And this is what Danielle was saying. You would have to kind of, it's a bit of a reverse thought process, as you're adding and subtracting to get to the awarded amount. So I most often see people just manually entering into the adjustments tab. So this is for year one. Since we kind of went over year two a bit, I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate kind of a pseudo mod. For this award, let's think, and we would only do year one, and then we would activate. And then when we get year two, it would be a modification record. And I'm just going to kind of demonstrate what we would do on the reconciliation tab for a modification record. So we would find this allocation, and it is currently set to not authorized. We would move that to authorized. There likely would be budget cuts, so when you're doing this in a mod record, you have the option to indicate incremental funding amounts. So let's say 5,000 was cut. You could make those adjustments here, but for sake of this demonstration, I'm going to stick with the 50,000, and the allocation here would still be correct with the indirects because we've already claimed that 13,875 in year one. So here, all we're doing is moving it to authorize, clicking OK. And now we're going to navigate to the budget reconciliation. And now we'll see this drop down budget period 2. So here we still have $50,000 that we're allocating to this outgoing sub. And we are putting that all in sub agreements over 25,000. Because we've already assessed the indirect rate on the previous project. Let's see, question. Oh, thanks, Zach. So I'm going to go through a couple other pages just for sake of demonstration, since I am demonstrating like the new process for outgoing subs. Personnel, a lot of questions we get is, I'm not able to find, Dr. Smith at University of Minnesota to add to the personnel. That's not applicable for the RAMP entry. Our RAMP system is specific to UW-Madison, so we only need to add UW-Madison or UW system if you're in system personnel. So on the personnel tab, we are listing all personnel or all key personnel on the proposal. So if we had another investigator here, we would, list them on this page. And the key personnel tab, as we all know, is just identifying those named on the notice of award. So that would just be the PI in this case. The effort tab, effort is identified on this page through budget allocations. So you can see here that we have all 10 of our budget allocations. And since this is ramp and it's specific to UW, we are only entering effort for the UW allocations or budget periods here. So I just demonstrated here that, effort is entered each year just on the UW allocations here. And I don't think we need to review. Yeah, Mandy, it would be great if there's a way to copy and paste. Yeah, I hope hopefully that's in the works. But yeah, it is a lot of data entry. One thing that I have learned is that yes, Marty, we do technically only need to enter effort for those listed as key in the notice of award. However, this page, the effort entries here are what populates the project team in Wiser. So keep that in mind. We are only required, university-wide required to enter effort for those listed on the notice of award, but this does populate other entries in SFS. So if that is a requirement for you, just keep that in mind.
Do we have to do all the years at the same time, Allison, or can we do just the first year?
I generally, especially since historically for awards like this, where we're awarded the entire period of performance, I generally like to see effort listed for all years, especially since effort isn't something that we change from year to year, especially for the person listed on the notice of award. I prefer to see and like to see that the baseline effort is entered for all years. As we all know, you have that flexibility to, adjust your effort within the allowable categories, but I do like to see all effort listed, especially for these larger multi-year awards where you're awarded the entire upfront amount. Matthew, if I'm saying that if we list non-key co-Is on the effort smart form, that they will be listed as co-Is on the project ID in Wiser. I'll translate it into what maybe you are familiar from Whisper. So in Whisper, you were able to generate a project team under each project on the projects tab. So that would generate to, I think it's called the project team in Wiser for each subsequent project ID. So that is populated from who is listed under each budget allocation in this smart form. Does anyone have any questions? That's the most of the demonstration I had for the smart forms, but I just want to make sure I address any specific questions on the reconciliation, allocation, and financial setup pages for outgoing subs. I tried to identify the most common issues that we see, which are on the allocation, including the outgoing sub specific budget data. Again, that is handled at the Subaward Portal. We are entering the total costs and the UW indirect rate and associated indirect costs.
Do you see Allison, do you see Sarah's question in the chat?
Oh, no, let me look. For senior key who need to be on projects but don't have effort to track. I haven't seen that, Sarah. I could definitely I could take that question and get back to you. I'm thinking yes, but I don't know if there are effort implications for that.
Yeah, that doesn't drive Wiser or Workday. So I would say if there's no effort, then don't put anybody on there at this point until we know further.
All right, well, I think we can definitely go over more questions in the Q&A, but for this recording.
Megan's
let's
got her
have-
hand up.
Oh, sure. Sorry, I can't see hands
Oh, okay.
when I'm screen sharing. Nope, no worries.
I was just gonna interrupt anyway. Hi, Megan McGuire here.
Hi, Megan.
I have a quick question that maybe it's too early to have this answered. But once we go with the new uniform guidance of being able to claim indirect costs on the first 50,000 instead of $25,000 of a subaward, do you guys know how we're gonna handle that for setup in ramp? Are there going to be separate lines for over 25,000 or over 50,000? Because I'm assuming that will transition new awards after we go to that new uniform setup or uniform guidance will apply the $50,000. But if we still have awards that we're still using the 25,000, we would still, am I making any sense?
No,
I
yes,
might
that
not-
makes sense.
I may not be.
That makes sense. I can't answer specifically on whether or not ramp will look different.
Okay.
But let's, because right now we know that uniform guidance changed, but we are still obligated to abide by our F&A rate, which specifies 25,000.
Correct. So
can't-
during
yeah,
during the
so-
transition time, I'm wondering will there be extra lines for subaward over 50,000?
I don't think so. I can't speak to that, but I'm just going to do a demonstration here on, let's say we still stick with 50,000, and the F&A would now be 27,750 because that's 55% on 50,000. And then for the reconciliation for budget period 1, we would do this still calculates. It's still the way that ramp is set up. It says 25,000 here, but it will calculate this box in ramp will calculate 55.5% on whatever is in here. So we have 50,000 here, 27,750. If we put 100,000 in here, it'll still calculate
Okay.
55% off of whatever. So again,
Okay.
I don't know what ramp will look like. I don't know. I haven't been in any conversations about what ramp will look like. But this is just something that I know. We also see people put, 150,000, the entire thing on the 25, and then they're, struggling with why this doesn't say 13,875. So this box will populate whatever you put in it against 55.5 or whatever
Okay.
indirect rate is in the budget allocation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That does help me. Thanks.
And I'm sure there will be guidance on, when we do have a new F&A rate agreement, and if it is 50,000, I'm sure there will be guidance from RSP on how to handle that. But in terms of what ramp calculates, this specific box does not have a limit of $25,000. And then if, when that does change, it would just be, for year 2, if you've reached that new max of 50,000, then, but subsequent budget periods would be adjusted accordingly, similar to how it is for 25,000. It just really depends on what the amount is that we have listed for the direct costs.
Allison, there's a question in the chat asking if we can see what it looks like to add a separate project for a second UW department. Financial
sure.
setup and budget allocation. Don't know if we have time for that quickly.
Yeah. So, financial accounts, again, these are projects. So if we indicate to you, hi, please fill out the smart forms, this will need at least 3 projects. you know, or you know that I have 2 investigators and I want to split it out. When you do, I'm just going to assume they're in the same unit because that is easier just for demonstration purposes. You can either add this button up here. This will just generate a completely blank financial account. But if you know that your other investigator is either in your same department or division or just want to use the dates, you can go over here and click the copy button. And me and Jennifer are gonna do a project together. And so here we're just gonna update our new PI. So now the project PI is Jennifer. She's in my same department. And then all of this is the same because it's a UW project. So we're keeping GM10, all the same F&A fund code, all the same information. So I prefer the copy function because they pre-populate a lot of these things. The only things that you really need to update is the project name, the PI, and dates if you're copying to do different budget period dates. So now you'll see this new financial account. I'm going to pretend we did 5 more of those because again, this project doesn't have automatic carryover. So you need a new project or financial account for each budget period. So for demonstration purposes, we're going to allocate. Now we have to, let's see, I'm going to copy. You can either, again, do a new one, which is a blank form, or use the copy feature. And now this is, again, this is one of the most common mistakes when creating multiple accounts and allocations is, again, think of the allocations as a pot of money. So I have a new pot of money that I want to give Jennifer. So I have to update the financial account because this is where the money is going to. You're depositing the money into Jennifer's project. And I'm just going to update the name here. And I'm going to click authorized and I'm going to stick with the same dollar value. Oh, I just want to mention something. Right now, does this allocation include cost share? This should be no for everything, no matter if you actually have cost share on the award or not. Right now, we are not using RAMP's functionality for documenting cost share within the smartforms. The guidance on the website is if you have cost share on the award to enter no here on the allocation and then upload the cost share documents to the award record. Because it's a manual entry right now for us. This may change in Workday. We don't know. You will hear updated guidance if that's the case. So down to the budget reconciliation. So again, we added another project for Jennifer here, and we have $100,000 in direct costs. So just for ease of entering, pretend I entered all of that into detailed cost categories. This is the direct costs, and it will populate the UW associated 55.5% on our direct costs because we didn't have any in this budget. I didn't build in any exempt costs like tuition remission or equipment or something like that. Does that answer? I forget who asked this question. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, I believe it did.
Okay. And I don't know, we got kind of carried away with editing. So typically, I don't know which one is not. Oh, this one, I think. Anyways, I started adding stuff. But anyways, we want to get to, ideally, a $0 difference. A $0 difference here means that you have correctly allocated and reconciled your budget. So if you see a difference here, that means that your reconciliations and allocations are off. And I recommend typically going back to the allocations page and seeing, hey, what did I allocate? What did I not reconcile correctly, and here you can see discrepancies. So I know I messed this up, but the original demonstration had a 0. And that's the goal. That's what you want to send back to RSP. That means that you have hopefully correctly reconciled everything. When we do our review, there may be issues that we need resolved, and then you'll see a record sent back to unit review, and hopefully we will have specified exactly what issues need correction.
So there's another question in the chat. So for example, 2 separate projects for 2 UWPIs. On the financial setup page for the direct and indirect amounts, we would need to just calculate what would be for PI number 1 and what would be for PI number 2, correct?
Yes. So on the financial setup page, I lost the question. The financial setup page really doesn't have any funds associated with it. The financial setup page, well, it does have the indirect cost base type, but the financial account information is the name, the dates, project PI, the indirect cost base type, which once it's activated, this type cannot be edited even by RSP. We need Huron to make a correction here. So it's very important that you're entering the correct indirect cost base type on initial award creation. And then you're entering the GM codes and the rule set information. So you really aren't entering financial data in the financial setup page. That's really just project specific information. The budget allocation page is where you're entering lump sum direct and indirect costs and the F&A rate. So on the UW project, I entered $100,000 in direct for UWPI number 1, 55%, 55.5 IDC, which automatically, well, I'm entering what it is, but then on the reconciliation page, this will automatically calculate, assuming you've reconciled into the correct cost categories. Oh yeah, budget allocation page. Yeah, so the budget allocation page is where you're documenting the lump sum direct and indirect splits for each UWPI. And then on the reconciliation page, that's where you reconcile these lump sums into the detailed cost categories for each UWPI. And then for subs, really the main difference here that I wanted to emphasize for the reconciliation, this is what this is how I instruct people when I'm doing one-on-one trainings with them, is for GM15 projects or outgoing subs, you should only be using these 2 cost categories, nothing else. You shouldn't have any salary, fringe for the outgoing sub, only those 2 cost categories. And then the reverse for UW projects. For UW projects, you're only reconciling into the detailed cost categories, and these 2 should be blank. So like when I'm reviewing an award that has an outgoing sub, I'll flip to the reconciliation page, likely one of the first pages, and just see if there's anything reconciled, because then you have to backtrack and figure out where the issues are. All right, I want to give time for Jennifer to go over her portion, and then we can kind of jump into more Q&A if you want. Does that work for you, Jennifer?
That sounds great.
Okay.
I did see that there's a couple more questions that came in the chat. We're gonna hold on those until after I go through my brief part, and then we'll pick up
Okay.
I can
on
answer
the couple
that.
questions that have just come in a minute. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, so bear with me. This is always a fun challenge. Let's see here. Okay. So the first thing I want to point out is that the RFP webpage has some great resources for subawards. If you go to the outgoing subawards section, there's information about the proposal stage, there's information about the issuance stage, and then information about modifications and invoicing. But the piece that I wanted to point out is that we have video walkthroughs available for how to request a subaward in the Subaward portal. It's right here. Those were created a couple of years ago, so there are some fields that are new in the portal that aren't in the video walkthrough, but for the most part, the information is current enough that it's quite helpful. So you can do it on your own time in terms of walking through how to do how to request a subaward in the portal. There's also the steps outlined here. So if you wanted to do a side-by-side while you're trying to request one in the portal, this will give you the steps as well. I'm going to go ahead and kind of walk through one really quickly just so that you can see. But I did want to back up a little bit. Really, the motivation for wanting to do this red hot topic was to talk about the change in how we are allocating subawards on awards that have restricted carryover. Initially, the guidance when we moved to ramp was that we would need one project number for each subaward, but that subaward project would continue for the life of the award. That is not the case. When we have a award that has carryover restrictions or it's not SNAP eligible, it has it's subject to the expanded authorities. Anyway, we need to manage those funds based on project years. If there's carryover restriction, we need to have a new project for the main award every year, and we need to have a new project for the subaward every year. We did do this previously with separating project years for the main award. And then we had there was separate projects each year for the subawards, but all those subawards were lumped into one project. Now, because we do need to have one project per subaward, we'll need to have then one project per subaward per year on those subawards that are on those awards that have carryover restrictions. So I want to just make sure that that's really clear because I know there's been a lot of confusion about that. If you do have an award that you've had set up already, and you know that it was set up so that the subawards were just one project number for the life of the award, but it has carryover restrictions, please reach out to your accountant and we can make sure that that's on a list so that we can add subsequent projects for that award. We are working through internally to get a list of ones that need to be updated, but it's also helpful if you can reach out to your accountant just so that we know that it's on the list to be updated. Because we do need to have that as we move into Workday, they need to have separate projects. So I just wanted to make that clear before I dive into the Subaward portal. So I wanted to go into the portal. So when you log in to the portal, you'll see something like this. I'm actually acting as a department contact as opposed to me internally because I see something slightly different than what you do. And now it's gonna be slow on me, I'm sorry. All right. So when you go into the portal and you're going to request a new subaward, you need to enter the award ID in the search. Once you do that, you'll get the award to come up. And this is a list of all the current subawards that are on that award. We're going to add a new one. So we're going to scroll all the way to the bottom. And so we're going to add a new subaward. Okay, so this is the new subaward information form that will pop up. In this first field here, you'll select a project ID. And we're gonna select one of the subaward ones. Hopefully this will allow me to do that. So this is a sub to Stanford for year 5. You may have tried to select a project for a new subaward and gotten an error saying that it's not a GM15 project. This means that the project wasn't set up to carry a subaward, and so you'll need to go back to get that project issued to have the ability to carry a subaward. So when you're doing a setup, you have to make sure that you're entering in, when a new award, the projects for the main award as well as projects for the subawards, because those are set up slightly differently as GM15 to handle the budget correctly. So we selected a Stanford subaward, and then we would type in Stanford as our choice. And then we select a contact for this sponsored projects office at Stanford, and then a PI for the project. We do a budget period, and this award is a 9/1 start, so we'll go with 9/1/24. 31. Okay. And then this is where you enter in the direct cost and indirect cost for the subaward. This is strictly for the subaward. We do not enter in UW indirect costs that are assessed on the subaward. So in RAMP, you are entering in the subaward as all direct costs. But in the portal, we just care about what the funds are that we're giving to the subawardee. So in Allison's example, she had allocated $50,000 to the subaward. For ease of math, we'll do $40,000 as the direct cost for that subaward, and then another $10,000 for indirects. There's no cost share on this award. So we're just going to enter 0. If you had cost share, this is the cost share that your subawardee is responsible for, then you would enter that amount there. And then if you had a specific spending edit that you wanted to denote here, a lot of times it's the same as the project, but you can also select if there are other ones available. And then it says, should the first $25,000 be allocated on 3840? So if this is a new subaward, and we have not assessed the indirect costs for UW on the first 25,000, then we would select yes here. If we're in year 4 of a subaward and we've already met our threshold of the first 25,000, then we'd select no. And then this is a research project, so we would select for research. Have there been any changes made to the subaward? If this is year 3, if you have a slightly adjusted scope of work, or if this is if there was a change from the proposal stage that you want to make sure you call out here, that's your ability is to do that in this note section here. If you have specific reporting requirements that you need, you can add those here. Sometimes if there's a fellowship, there's a different set of reporting requirements that you want to call out that can be entered there. And then it asks if there's any conflict of interest between the EWPI and the subrecipient. We can select no. Will the subrecipient's activities include human subjects? I'm going to say yes here. I'm going to say no to animal subjects. And then it says, will the subrecipient share human subject data with UW? I'm going to say yes here. And then I'm also going to say yes that we're going to share human subjects data with the subrecipient. And then you'll notice this question up here. If you plan to send or receive human subject data, will this be covered in a separate data use agreement? I'm going to say no. And when I say no, you'll notice another section pops up here. It says, please download, fill out, and reattach this form. This is attachment 7, which is part of the FDP template set of forms. And I'm gonna open this up and download it. So you can see what this looks like. So if you don't have a separate data use agreement, can you see my PDF here? Okay, great. So if you don't have a separate data use agreement as part of your project, we ask that you can complete this attachment 7. It asks how you're swapping data between the subrecipient and the main entity, what kind of data it's going to be. Is it protected health data? Is it a limited data set? Is it de-identified? So you can select one of those. It's PHI, and then how long does this essentially this data sharing occur? And you can say either it's just the first budget period, or if it's for the entire project, you can say that. And then they ask for a description of what the data is. So we ask that you complete this form and then upload it to the subaward request, and then we will include this in with the agreement. So they would just attach that document here. This is only if you have human subject data that you're swapping back and forth with an entity. Generally, we see this on NIH awards where this makes sense to use this form. But if you're using some sort of separate data use agreement, then you don't need to complete attachment 7. Then we ask for budget and a budget narrative and a scope of work. Occasionally, the scope of work is combined in with the budget. We like to see a separate scope of work, but that's not always the case of what happens at the proposal stage. As long as we can get enough information about what the subrecipient will be doing from the budget narrative, we can go with that. A letter of intent is not required, although often it's helpful if you have a letter of intent or a letter of commitment from your subrecipient to participate in a project to attach it. This provides information about contact, who to contact for us if we're having some difficulty getting a response from the subrecipient. It allows us to often verify if the subrecipient that you selected in the top here is the correct one. We've had some issues with like some of the Texas entities where they all have kind of the same name. And so we'll have entities where you're subbing to University for Texas A&M, and Texas A&M Agricultural is a separate than the regular Texas A&M. And so if we have a letter of intent, that allows us to kind of sort through that and make sure that we're using the correct entity. State University of New York is another one that tends to trip us up a little bit. You enter in a contact, and then that goes that. Actually, I have it up here. And then I'm administrative contacts. If you have any additional notes that you wanted us in the subaward issuance side to know, you can add it here into the notes section. And then you click submit to RSP. But it's not going to let me do that because I don't have budget. So let's just attach a budget briefly. And then, so if you don't have a scope of work, you just need to click the include in the budget, and then it will allow you to submit the request. So now the request has been submitted and it's going to show up in my work queue. So those are the things I kind of wanted to go through in terms of a request. And I think we can go ahead and leave a lot of time for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
There were a number of questions that I couldn't answer in the chat, or a couple.
Okay. Let me see. Okay. There was a question about the two account codes and what do those mean? So the account codes we're talking about are 3840 or 3845, and the 3840 is the amount of the subaward that is subject to F&A. And then 3845 is the amount of the subaward that's not subject to F&A. So it's that first 25,000 goes under 3840, and then anything above that 25,000 goes into 3845. If you have a subaward to a UW school, so if we're subbing to UW Milwaukee or UW River Falls, those are not regular subawards. Those are what we call share grants. And those all get coded to 3910, which is something that my team worries about more so than you need to worry about at your request stage. But those do not have indirect costs assessed on those subawards. So UW doesn't collect anything on those subawards in terms of indirect costs. The entity themselves can have indirect costs, but UW does not also collect. It would be double dipping because we're all part of the same family. The other code that you may hear about is 5708. When we do a re-grant, so if we get an award, say it's from NIH, and we're going to then set up a program where other entities can apply for that funding, and then we give out awards as an institution, we're re-granting those funds. And so we issue a re-grant. And again, there's no F&A assessed for UW on those awards. The entity themselves can have F&A that they assess, but we do not collect on those. Okay.
I can do a quick demo so I just want to call attention to page 2 of the learning material that was handed out. So the sheet for both shared grants and re-grants, they are going to be the naming convention, SG or REG. That was something else I forgot to mention, the naming convention. Here you can see sub. So if this is a shared grant or re-grant, it would just say SG or RG here. And as Jennifer mentioned, we don't have indirects on either one of those. So on the allocation, well, on the financial setup, you would enter none for the indirect cost base type. So this is item 1 under re-grants. And on the allocation page, the amounts would stay the same. So if you're giving 50,000, the amounts would stay the same, but the rate would be 0 here. And then on the reconciliation, it's a little bit different. It is indicated there that the amounts would go under other instead of the less than or greater than 25,000. So for a shared grant or a re-grant, it would just go here. And because we've identified that there is no indirect costs and a 0% F&A rate, it doesn't accrue any indirect costs here. So that's just a short demo for a shared grant or re-grant.
I'm seeing in the chat that people had difficulty hearing me. And so if you do have questions based on what I presented, please just reach out. I'm sorry that my audio is not what it should be. I've not had issues with this before, so my apologies. There is a question about what a department spending edit is. That's if you have a main award under one department, but then you have another department that is managing this particular project, you can have a different spending edit assessed with that. It's pretty unusual. So where would we do a no cost extension request from a sub-award? So once we have a sub-award issued, that would be handled through a modification request. And there's a link to a video on how to do a modification request. It's similar to the regular request. It's on that page, on the RFP web page. There's a video on how to request a modification. But we would wait till we have the no cost extension approved on the prime award before we request no cost extension for a sub award. This vertical modification was already fully executed on a subaward that has restricted carryover before the guidance to change back to a separate project for each year of the subaward. Should a new subaward be issued in place of that modification? I'm going to ask that, well, let's see. I do think that there are ways to handle this internally, through changing the funding string, but that's going to need to be on a case-by-case basis and kind of how best to handle that. So I guess what I would tell you as a whole is to reach out to your accountant. Jenny, I realize you're an accountant, so we can work together on how best to answer that question individually. But if you are in that situation where you've already had a modification issued on an existing award where carryover was restricted, I encourage you to reach out to your accountant and we can figure out how best to handle that to make sure that that's easily separated. Does the contracts team and RSP manage the creation of data use agreements, or does the portal create an agreement for signature? So you can do the attachment 7 within the portal, but a separate data use agreement is often negotiated. The contracts team can do that. Often there's more informal ones that happen at proposal stage. And so generally my team does not handle a separate data use agreement. We just deal with attachment 7. Lisa asks if she would like to include attachment 7 for a new subaward she just sent RSP. There is not a way to pull it back once you've submitted it to RSP, but what I would say is just reach out to us and we can make sure that that gets taken care of. Mary asks if my team works with incoming subawards, and we do not. We only go outgoing. Lori asks, I'm just stop using a notice of work per RSP now, but how do we set up a subaward budget in the Subaward Portal if the budget is not the same as the NOA? Example, the PI made some adjustments to the NOA due to NIH cuts. So if you have an award where you'd like to give your subawardee more money or less money, what we ask is that you go with what the NOA says in terms of setup, but then reach out to your accountant because we want to make sure that the accountants are aware of any adjustments that you're making, because any rebudgets, if they're within the expanded authorities allow us to rebudget, that's fine, but there's a threshold generally for awards. And if we exceed that threshold, if you're just doing it kind of on the side without your accountant's knowledge of what you're doing in terms of if you're giving the subaward more, then we may meet that threshold and not know it. And so we ask that you work with your accountant on your award before you make any adjustments to your subaward budgets. So once you get an award set up, reach out to your accountant, and then you can request the subawards based on the appropriate amount. The other option is to request those subawards and then do a modification down the road to increase the funding once you've made that change. But we ask that you at least work with your accountant so that that threshold is managed.
There was a question, can you clarify the division of work for the award setup team versus the sub-award, post-award accountant? I'm often confused about who's doing what. I responded with, check the RSP routing guidance. It does offer like really specific details for specific items like no cost extensions or carryover. I would say for the most part, things didn't really change from Whisper to Ramp. The awards team still does the same things that, we always have done, setting up awards, and accountants, like I'm just gonna use no cost extensions, for example, they were previously, done in Whisper and they are continued to be done in Ramp. But I would just check the RSP routing guidance. That's a lot of specific details will tell you who to contact in RSP. It's basically the search bar that's mid-page on the RSP homepage. I was looking at other questions. So there was a question that Andrea answered, but I just want to call it out for the rest of the group. So when we're completing the smart forms, like I showed in the demo, someone asked, if basically like, what are the amounts that we should enter? Should we stick to what's on the award, even though we know that we might change what we're going to issue them in the portal? And we recommend that you stick with a baseline of what was issued in the notice of award. So basically with Ramp, just like with Effort, we are establishing a baseline for what's issued on the notice of award. So, pretend that our award indicated that we were, awarded $50,000 for this University of Minnesota sub, even though maybe we know that we're going to give them $45,000. Let's still enter the $50,000 in Ramp because we basically want Ramp to match as closely as possible to the notice of award as a baseline. And I just wanted to mention, I'm sure everyone, is aware that, if carryover is allowed on your project, then what I demoed here, you basically would just have one project for the budget period. So that's just if carryover is allowed. We have some time now just for, I know we went over a lot of Q&A, but if anyone has any other questions, or if you'd like to unmute and ask a question or put something in the chat, we just have now just a lot of time for Q&A, or if we don't have any, that's fine too.
I will make a plug. I'm doing a session with Andrea at the symposium about subawards. And so if that's something that you're interested in, or if you missed because my audio is garbled, then you can go visit us again at the symposium and learn more. Subboard modifications, someone asked whether we issue those, initiate those in the Subaward Portal or in Ramp or both. And so if you've got a subaward modification to process, that goes through the portal. If you have like a subsequent year of funding from NIH, that needs to go through Ramp before we do any sort of subaward modification for those existing subawards.
Can I just jump in and ask a quick follow-up question on that? So like if a subaward is changing PIs, we can make that request right in the portal. But if we have a new mod for funding, we request that in Ramp first, and then we process that through the subaward portal after the modification is completed.
Yes, that's correct. Although what I would say is that if your PI is changing on your subaward, we want to make sure that the prime is okay with that. And so a lot of times we'll ask for some sort of documentation that the prime is aware that's changing. Like, have you done an RPPR report where it's mentioned that your PI is changing at your subaward? We want to make sure that that's there's documentation that that's happening, or someone in the prime knows that that's gonna occur. And so we'd ask that you provide that in the portal, but it's not necessary in ramp.
Okay, great, thanks.
Hey, Jennifer. Sorry, just one little exception to that is that if the prime has issued a modification recognizing the change in a subawardee PI, we'd actually process that mod in ramp as well because it's a modification to the overall award. It doesn't happen as often, but if there is an incoming modification from the prime sponsor of any kind, that's going to go through ramp.
That is correct. Thank you very much, Chelsea. Yeah.
It would just
if-
be a terms mod, so like we're not changing the subawardees information in ramp because they aren't in ramp. It would just be basically a record that we received the mod, and it would be showing up in SFS, and you'd get the email of a terms mod.
Basically, the standard is if there's any formal notification from the prime sponsor, that should be in ramp. But if it's, you know, just a report, an RPPR report, or if it's just an email back and forth with your program officer, then that can go just straight through the portal. But that's why we ask at the subaward stage.
Would it be possible for Allison to go through an award setup for an example of a subaward project that had its budget imported from Whisper to ramp? Oh, okay, so where the initial budget allocations were not allocated to specific categories. And what units should be aware of when doing budget allocation reconciliation? I think I'm understanding this. So just as a general note, if you had submitted your budget or, you know, your proposal in ramp prior to June of 2023, and then that record was converted to either, well, I think this only applies to awards. So if this was a converted award record, so it will be an MSN record, and now you have a mod. I don't have a demo handy of this, but I can kind of walk you through or talk you through that. So if you have an MSN record that you now have received a modification on, you will not see budget allocations for previous segments of the award. So during the conversion process, because Whisper really wasn't set up with budget allocation data, it was all merged into the project page. You won't see existing budget allocations, or you won't see the correct amount. I've seen kind of a hodgepodge of different scenarios. Really, I don't think that it really matters too much, because let's say you have, this is year 3 of the award and it's a converted record, and maybe there's just one lump sum budget allocation. One, we want to make sure that moving forward, you want to make sure that we have identified that we have the correct projects. So my first recommendation would be making sure if you have an outgoing sub on this award that was a converted record from ramp, that you have a correct number of projects that you need. Either you have multiple UW accounts, and for converted awards like this, likely your award was modified by a Huron consultant that added these outgoing projects for awards that were set up prior to the initiative of all of these outgoing separate projects. So hopefully you see that there is a financial account with that. Likely the budget allocations page does not have previous or future allocations. What I recommend is just adding a new allocation for what you need to be processing. So if you're adding $50,000, I would recommend that you, and this is what we would do as well when we're reviewing the record, that you have confirm whether or not you have reached the cap on the first 25,000 for indirects. Most likely you probably have for year 3, you know, beyond year 1, especially for larger subaward amounts, but all you're going to do is add a new budget allocation. We don't need to historically, you know, correct previous allocations for previous budget years where we've already received and processed those funds. On converted awards, the allocations won't be there. However, you will see that those funds have already been processed and are available in Wiser and SFS. So I just would recommend moving forward on those records, like from future state, and just making sure that you have the correct projects, the number of projects. If for some reason you're getting a mod where you don't have automatic carryover and you don't see that you have separate projects each year, you know, as Jennifer mentioned, RSP does have a list and has recruited, you know, folks to help correct this, you know, where there's a number of awards that were kind of caught in limbo of the different guidance at periods of time. So I would just go with, what do you need moving forward? Do you have the correct number of projects? If not, go ahead and add the next one for the next budget period that you're working on, and then just add the budget allocation that you need. Does that answer your question? I hope so. When rebudget happens, needs to add or decrease funds to a sub, do we always need to provide clarification, or should clarification be provided only when the amount is large? I'm unsure about this part because every once in a while I receive concerns from the subboard team.
We're gonna ask for a budget in the subaward to match what you're requesting. And so if a rebudget happens, like I said before, please work with your accountant to make sure that they're aware of it so that we're sure we're meeting any thresholds. But we are gonna verify whether the budget that's in the portal matches what you've actually requested to go to the subaward. If there's no budget in the notice of award for the subaward, we may not know that you've rebudgeted. But that doesn't mean that you get off scot-free. You do need to talk to your accountant. And so. Harry says, I was told I have to have a final complete invoice before they will lower the budget. Not sure I'm following you, Carrie.
Yeah, I
Why
have
don't we
a
talk
bunch of,
offline?
yeah.
Any more questions?
Hey, I do actually have a follow-up questions, if you don't mind. Angela here with WCER, and a questions we sometimes wonder is that when we rebudget, and so for the subaward team, for you guys, you just need to follow up my questions earlier. Like you just need like pretty much the information from our subs, right? Like an updated budget spreadsheet and then updated like justification. Is that how about like, for example, overall, do you care if like if we provide an overall budget that includes um our like UWPI's, you know, the whole project's budget to shows like, hey, our team, the project actually have enough extra money to give to give this subaward to give the subaward like more funds for this upcoming year. Does my question make sense? I'm sorry. Yeah. So I just wonder, like, whenever we request for modification in Subaward Portal, do you guys also consider, okay, look into like UW's budget as a whole? It's like, oh, so this project actually have enough money to like add 20K to this sub. They didn't just like make up this number and then say, oh, they want to give to the sub like this additional 20K and actually don't have enough money to do so.
Yes, we do verify whether you've got enough funds in your account to be able to issue the subaward that you're requesting,
Okay,
both
but
at the issuance stage and at the modification stage.
Okay. Thank you.
Elisa has a great question. She says, has anyone successfully set up a subaward with the Salvation Army? They are not listed as an entity. Can I choose that I can choose? I'm not sure what legal pieces they would need to be a subaward of UW. I'm used to clearinghouse entities. So if you've got an entity that's not in that drop-down list on your request, you can type in or free text an entity, and then our office reaches out to that subawardee to gather the correct information that we need to get them entered into our system. We have requirements from the federal government to do subrecipient monitoring, so we collect audit information from those new entities to get them cleared to be subs for us. But our office reaches out to those entities to get that. If you're going to work with an entity that you don't think is one we've worked with before, and you're maybe waiting for your award to be set up, you can reach out to our team and we will let you know whether they're in our system. And if they're not, we can get a jump on those forms ahead of time so that there's not a delay when you make that request. But I just ask that you reach out to us and we can talk through that process.
I think this might be our natural pause of, questions. Thank you all for attending. We do have this recorded. And it will be, I think, posted as a on-demand learning video. I'm guessing we haven't figured out the details of that, but yeah, we do have the recording. And again, if you have any specific questions on subs, please reach out, and we hope this was helpful for you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
It looks like the host is recording, which I think might be Kyle. It says it's recording. I hope it recorded. It says recording on here, but